The sun rose over St. Mildred's on a gentle wave of gold, basking the narrow streets of Stansfield, while in a light that made even the leaning chimneys and moss flecked gravestones appear cheerful. Spring finally taken old, coaxing daffodils into bloom beneath the ligate and prompting a spirited flurry of activity in the church hall, where preparations for the Easter pageant were underway. The vicar, Reverend Lionel Rose, stood near the phone, fussing with a list of hymns and peering over his glasses at the scattering of choir voices of artillery rehearsing and Pembroke's stern eye. "Come now, Peter, you're towards vain again," said Bart gently. "You can't use mumble through the Lord's work, dear." Peter Varnes, 11, toweaded, and often losing his own thoughts, when Sedan stared harder at his sheet music. Eden never much like singing, but his mother insisted good bill discipline, and liked the biscuits after rehearsal well enough. His voice, when I remembered to say it, had a curious clarity, like that mother old lady's nodding pews and whisper, that one break arts when it's older. By the time the rehearsal drew to a close, Emerald Pembroke pronounced herself just about satisfied, which was the highest praising of them I heard that spring. The boys were dismissed, and they scattered like a handful of dropped marbles, rushing toward the green with shouts and laughter. But Peter lingered. He had left something vain, a teeny tin soldier, not a year than a sum, that he kept tucked in his cassock's pocket for carry. His talisman. He never performed without it. He returned to the vestry alone. It was 20 minutes before anyone noticed and they come home. And by supertime, when his mother's boys had grown Cyril and the constable being fetched, the villa green was quiet, the church was locked, and Peter Varnes vanished. News travels fast in any villa, but in Stansfield, it moved with uncanny speed. By dusk, the black horse in a fine silent, four exposed middle as Emery Flanders, the vaquer, relaxed what little a venken firm, went missing between the vestry and the lane gravely. Door was still locked from the inside. No signs of struggle. Used, vanished. Emerson Speck Harwell, sitting near the hearth with her crochet basket and her own spaniel at her feet, sniffed loudly. "You mark my words, it be that Romigi boy, the new one from the Porose, always skulking. Or the organist matters someone else, always looked a bit too fond of those boys." "Not a series of proof," snapped Mr. Harwell. "Besides, as a badney, couldn't snatch a feather pillow, let alone a boy." "Have the police coming from Kingsbridge?" "Not yet. They were hoping they just wandered off. But it's been hours." "Maybe the child got lost," suggested Reverend Bruce, who had entered unnoticed and now looked more as than usual. "Perhaps it's playing a game." There was silence. Everyone knew Peter was a quiet boy, not one for mischief. M.S. Harwell gave a pointy look toward the end of the room, where Miss Marple sat, sipping her tea with a farewell expression. "Well, if anyone can untangle it," Elspeth said, not entirely joking, "it's Jane." Miss Marple set down her cup. "It opened the voice merely hiding," she said softly. "But it's very unlike him to Miss Supper, or to leave vain his little soldier. He always keeps it in his right cassock pocket." "How on earth would you know that?" someone asked. Miss Marple smiled fondly. "Innit the lining of that cassock," she said. "And boys don't hide treasures in the left when they were right-handed." There was a pause as the room took that in. "Either is I," said it, "we shall know more by morning. These things have a way of revealing themselves, especially in places where people think no one is watching." And with that, she turned her attention back to her tea, as though nothing more pressing lay ahead than finishing the final stitch on the dory in her handbag. But the pincide, Miss Marple already felt it. Something was very wrong in Stansfield in the Valley, and the choir boys' disappearance was only the beginning. By the following morning, Stansfield in the Valley fully succumbed to a kind of nervous inertia, a hush broken only by rustling curtains, Alphenise gossip, and the sharp crack of the church gate as the constable passed through for the third time that morning. Though no official statement had yet been made, everyone knew the truth they were avoiding. Peter Varnes had not come home. The vicar, looking more gaunt than usual, gave a strange service at morning prayers, omitting the quaint early and stumbling over the words of the collect. His hands trembled as he closed the Book of Common Prayer. Some whispered that he slept at all. Others said they seen him pass in the churchyard with a lantern in the early hours. By mid-morning, the small police force from Kingsbridge arrived. Inspector Carolan Serrantorne, both button and bristle in tailed uniforms, looking as out of place in the village as motor cars on cobbled lanes. They questioned the vicar first, then the housekeeper, then the choir boys one by one, assembling in the vestry like actors waiting for their que. Miss Marple saluted Pembroke, who daba her eyes with a lassitude handkerchief and insisted Peter had never given her the slightest trouble. Was a quiet boy, not at all like his returns, I sniff. Never latte, never rude. Always talk to biscuits, never tree. What of his friends? Asked Miss Marple. Oh, a pla little with Geraldine Graham. To Gerald to boisterous by Alf. And that Romigi child. Evan, I believe, to we can say in carries it. You never know what happens when children of disparate backgrounds mix. Miss Marple inclined her head, making no comment. I suppose, Pembroke continued, dabbing again, it's possible a runoff. But where good go? And why? His shoes were still under the pew. Shoes? Asked Miss Marple, her eyes sharpening. Yes, Pembroke said, surprised. One of the little ones pointed it out. He must have Chan back into them after rehearsal. Left his cassock neatly folded, though, on the bench. It was all very deliberate. Miss Marple sat waiting for a moment, watching the choir boy filing out of the holiness mud and certain clusters, their voices subdued, like birds in the aftermath of a storm. Later that day, the search began in earnest. Constables and volunteers spread out across the surrounding fields and woods, poking at heroes, calling Peter's name with diminishing optimism. The Guelve in the rectory was checked. The mill pond was redhead. Nothing. By afternoon, the atmosphere has shifted again, from fretful concern to something colder, darker. Rumors began to stir. Emil Specharwell squashed in a figure lurking near the cemetery wall 2 nights before. The organist quietly told her that Peter had once come home with a bruise and bone to say how it got it. Geraldine grandfather said, attached to loudly at the butchers, that summer boys were born to vanish. It was Miss Marple who quietly asked if anyone had checked the bell tower. It didn't take care to them. The ladder up to the belfry was narrow, rickety, and rarely used. But young Van Romigi, eager to help the search, volunteered to climb it. Moments later, his voice echoed from above, tight and breathless. It's not here, but something else is. They wrote it down gently. A book, The Adventures of Robin Hood, though I read and clearly much read. Inside the front cover, in fine pencil, Peter Barnes, property of Stansfield Church lending shelf, and, tucked between the pages, a paper scrap, a torn corner of the hymn schedule. On it, in the summer fine pencil, a single word scrawled unevenly. Stay. Miss Marple turned it over in her hand. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes had grown distant. Later, back in her cottage, she placed the paper next to the soldier figurine, retrieved earlier from Peter's cassock pocket, which Miss Pembroke handed over without thought. "I do hope," she murmured, "that is still somewhere it can be reached." The doorbell rang. It was Geraldine Graham. I heard you were helping, stammered. I didn't do anything, Anis. Very saw Peter that afternoon, used before rehearsal. She looked up at him gently. And what was he doing, Gerald? Shifted nervously, talking to someone. I couldn't tell who. Used, as though, being the vestry curtain. Miss Marple's knitting pose. "Thank you, Gerald," she said, her voice off. "You were being very helpful." And in that moment, say was quite sure, someone in the village was not telling the whole truth. And whatever Peter had meant by that one word, stay, it had not been written for himself. On Wednesday morning, the village green was quiet. Though the tension beneath its surface had only grown more taut. There was something unnatural in the stillness of it all. The great shop doors cracked open too slowly. The great neighbors nodded a bit too quickly, as if trying to prevent nothing a chant. Bare Stansfield in the valley was holding its breath. Inspector Calvel attacking over the chum to use as a temporary base, and the sight of him there, broad red and blinking, seemed to throw the entire village into retreat. People kept their eyes lowered, their conversations muted. They were afraid now, not only for Peter Barnes, but of what else might be uncovered. Miss Marple, of course, did not retreat. She spent the morning taking a leisurely walk to the rectory, pausing to observe the comings and goings of villagers with a serene expression and a keenly working mind. At one point, she stopped outside the churchyard to examine the footpath it had run the night before, and the softened soiled impressions, the heavier tread of boots, the narrow daintiness of a chill sole, a single scuff mark with a turned heel. They weren't nog to be meaningful, perhaps, but she'd always believed you could tell everything about a person by the patterns they left behind. She continued to the rectory, where Reverend Groves welcomed her with a fragile sort of gratitude. I don't know what else to do, confessed poor Hertea with trembling hands. The boy's poor mother is beside herself, and the press is beginning to call. I never imagined anything like this could happen in Stansfield. Most villages, Miss Marple said, are a like class. From a distance, they appear simple, but look closely, and they find all manner of knots and threads crossing where you least expect them. Groves gave a miserable nod. Where's Peter traveled, Reverend? Not that is so. It was quiet, thoughtful. He often starving after rehearsal to tidy up. Once, he found him in the pews, you sitting. He asked what he was doing and said, listening. He gave a small, helpless laugh. He told him the church was empty. He replied, not to me. Miss Marple looked thoughtfully at her coop and the other children. He tried not to play favorites, but some are more sensitive than others. Gerald Ingram, Guelmaning, but easily led. Evan Romigi, bright, perhaps too bright, and lonely. Because of his background. Groves looked troubled. Yes, his father drank, juicy. Evan came to West through the charity school after his father died. His mother's housekeeper now for the Brancasters. Said Miss Marple, taking that name away. And the organist. M.R. Felden, a good man, reserved, perhaps, a bit obsessive. I believe he fought in the war. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Is a left-handed, by chance. Groves blinked. Why, yes, I believe he is. Curious, she murmured. Why do you ask? But Miss Marple only smiled her vague, polite smile and asked for more sugar. Meanwhile, the search for Peter has shifted from hopeful to procedural. The police questioned Van Romigi again, this time with more insistence. It was small, sharp-eyed, and anxious, his hands constantly picking at the front cuff of his sleeve. He didn't say where it was going. Evan said for the second time. We were just talking. He said there's something to do. And what was that? Asked Sergeant Turner. I don't know, Evan said. He looked scared. Not like someone who was running away, like someone who was being watched. Turner exchanged a glance with the inspector, who muttered something about troublemakers under his breath. Miss Marple had been watching waiting from the edge of the green. She stepped forward now, her manner pleasant, her tone theater-like. Evan dear, she said gently, did Peter ever say he was afraid of anyone? The boy looked at her. Not afraid. Used? Confused. He said someone told him to keep a secret. That it was a special kind of secret. Miss Marple blinked slowly. Did he say who? Evan hesitated. No. But he said it at todo with a vestry curtain. That's where it was when he said it. Said that's where he heard it. She gave him a kind smile. Thank you, Evan. That's most helpful. And as Evan was led back toward the schoolhouse, Miss Marple turned her gaze toward the timidez once more, toward the soft rise of the vestry windows and the curtain drawn inside them. She remembered the single scrawled word on the torn hymn sheet. Stay. Stay where? Not for safety. That word had been a command. And she was getting out of it now. Someone had told Peter Barnes exactly what to do that afternoon, and perhaps where to go. The question was, why? And what had they needed him to see? Or where's? Not see at all. The next morning, the mood in Stansfield Valley had grown brittle, as though the village were bracing itself for something called not named. The searches had become more methodical, systematic, and, increasingly, hopeless. The goods beyond the parish boundaries had been convoys. Outbuildings and barns were inspected. The Misterio was checked again. Yet there was still no sign of Peter Barnes. What there was, instead, was talk. whispers that darty vein lase curtains, growing more imaginati vaide o'er. It's a pani semen, said the mercifully at the post office, her voice trembling with satisfaction. So much pride in that choir. Always rehearsing, always performing. Mark my words, some since Haid in plan Said. At the Black Horse Inn, a group of younger men are in hushed tones about calling in Yernelis, until the barkeep, Emmer Renner, threatened to throw them out if they stirred up more trouble. Even at the church, murmurs floated like incense. The vestry felt colder now. The choir laughed, especially, attacking on a kind of reverence, as though the absence of Peter had sanctified the space in the most morbid of was. Miss Marple, of course, had not guased the day in idle speculation. Instead, she returned to St. Mildred's that morning with a soft goose sobre over her shoulders and a polite request to examine the church interior. The verger, Emernas, grunted his assent, and no Miss Marple since se was a la dan better than to question her quiet persistence. She walked slowly down the nave, tacking in the stonework, the brass plugs, the dust dancing in the light cast through the stained glass windows. She stopped before the vestry door, which stood ajar. Inside, there was still and musty with the scent of candle wax and old vestments. On the far wall, the curtain still on. Miss Marple studied it carefully. It was a thick thing, green velvet, with a fringe of gold at the hem, and drawn across a low shelf to conceal storage. The sort of curtain a child might have if told to what, or the sort in which someone might whisper something private, something dangerous. She knelt, slowly, carefully, and peered beneath the heavy fabric. Dust, scoof marks, a small tear in the lining, revealing a fragment of good paneling. She reached in and withdrew something. Flat and pale, a plain card, the King of Hearts. Curious. Miss Marple turned it over. The back was patterned in faded red diamonds, worn at the edges. A child might have found such a thing amusing, or perhaps a man with a fondness for riddles. She placed it gently into her handbag. Later, in the garden behind the vicaraje, she sat with Reverend Groves again. It was paler than before, but less shocking, as though sleep finally cometó in the night. You knew Peter's family well, didn't you? Miss Marple asked, plucking at a strand of her knitting. Well enough, said Groves. His father's been gone nearly 5 years. Air travel. The mother, Edith, hard-working, respectable. She's never caused a bit of trouble. Peter was her quiet one. The older brother, Matthew, is a bold sort. Bold? Miss Marple repeated softly. Oh, not in a bad way. Use headstrong. Left the school early. Works for the coal merchant now. Takes after his uncle. A real spitfire in his use. Edith tries to keep the boys grounded, but a trial with a helpless Iraq. And Peter did ever express concern about anything or anyone in the church. Groves looked momentarily startled. Not to me. Eon se scared if the cold speak through dreams, but he thought that was you childish musing. It was sensitive. Miss Marple smiled. Children notice far more than we credit them for, especially the quiet ones. And Nadie, it wished she had listened better. In the late afternoon, Miss Marple returned to the quiet loft. The sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the pews below. She climbed the wooden stairs slowly, her steps barely making a sound. The loft was narrow and steeply pitched, with a view of the entire nave. It was the kind of place one could sit unseen and watch everything. She examined the floorboards. One was looser than the rest. Kneeling, she pried it upward. Inside was a folded length of paper, a torn sheet from an old church ledger. She unfolded it with care. Written across it in herald, until the pencil were 2 lines. It said its use pretend, but it felt like a rare secret. Miss Marple stared at the words for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she folded the paper, added it to her handbag beside the plain card, and replaced the floorboard. Down below, the door cracked open. Emerse, Pembroke stepped inside, a bundle of white robes in her arms. Oh, she said, seeing Miss Marple on the stairs. I didn't think anyone was here. It was admiring the view, said Miss Marple pleasantly. One sees so much more from above. Emerse, Pembroke gave a faint smile, her fingers tightening slightly on the robes. Yes, I suppose one does. Their eyes met for a fraction on her than politeness required. ante Miss Marple said. Did Peter ever confide in you, Mrs. Pembroke? The older woman blinked. No, nothing out of the ordinary. Eguestai, obedient, very devoted to the choir. Imagine trusted you. Mrs. Pembroke hesitated. Yes, I believe did. Miss Marple gave her a gentle nod. Then he expect, if he had something to say, he could have found a way to say it, even if he thought it wasn't meant to. Mrs. Pembroke's smile stiffened slightly. Yes, I'm sure he could have. She turned and disappeared into the shadows of the vestry. Miss Marple remained in the loft, alone once more. She sat in silence, letting the last of the light pass through the colored glass unpainted, shifting hues across the stone floor. She now had 3 pieces of Peter Varner's final moments, a playing card, a note, and a whispered memory of someone being the curtain. And somewhere in Stansfield, side was certain, someone was beginning to feel the pressure of truth drawing near. Now, generate section 5 of the story, ensuring smooth continuity from the previous section. Maintain the same passing, character development, and mystery build-up without premature reveals. Keep the word count consistent, progressing the narrative naturally while leading into the next section. By Friday morning, the search attacked on the hollow rhythms of routine. Villagers now walked in pairs instead of groups, and the countryside advent comes of seguridad hero seemed out the season they were a week ago. Still no trace of Peter Varnes. The police, weary and without leads, have begun to turn their attention inward, toward character assessments, explanations, and history. And inevitably, suspicion found its way to Evan Romilly. It was not from the village, not exactly. Though he had lived there nearly 2 years, he had never been fully of Stansfield. His mother's employment with the Brancaster household he might have found a place at school, but not belonging. It was too clever, too quiet, and the babble, too different. Miss Marple observed the shift with a disquieted gas. She had seen it before, how communities, when frightened, clashed at the unfamiliar Toblam. Evan had been pulled from school that morning, officially for questioning, though no one who said the word aloud. The boys sat in the corner of the church room, legs swinging nervously beneath a chair too tall for him. Inspector Calvert leaned forward at the desk, frowning like al serpentiduncle. You said Peter told you he was scared, Calvert repeated. Evan nodded. Scared of what? I don't know. I won't say. Varese someone told him to keep a secret. Evan hesitated, glancing sideways at the constable who stood by the door. Then he nodded again. And you didn't think to tell anyone before. I was afraid, Evan said. His voice smiled. He told me not to. He said, if anyone found out, it could ruin everything. Ruin what, exactly? Evan looked down at his feet. He didn't say. Outside the church room, Miss Marple had listened on a note to understand that Evan would not be of further help, not because he was Laino, but because he genuinely didn't know more. Or if he did, it had been very beneath the confusing weight of childish loyalty and fear. She excused herself and stepped back out onto the green. The day was bright but chilly, the kind of sunlight that gave no warmth. Across the way, she spotted Gerald Ingram walking beside his father. Head bowed. She crossed to intercept them. Good morning, M.R. Ingram. Gerald, she said warmly. The elder Ingram grunted. Miss Marple. Gerald looked up. Hello. I wonder, Gerald, if it matters you something, he said. About the day Peter disappeared. M.R. Ingram scolded. The boy said his piece, Miss Marple. No need to dress it up. I assure you, it may have no trouble. Eustace Martini been wandering about. Gerald looked at his father, who said unfolding his arms. 5 minutes. Miss Marple crouched slightly to Gerald's level, a soft smile playing on her face. You said before you saw Peter speaking to someone being the vested curtain. Yes, Gerald replied. I saw a shadow. And you rest sure it was a person. Gerald hesitated. Well, it moved, like someone standing in vain. It was told to be Peter. Was it the vicar? No, either haven't known. The vicar wears a long robe with a courting, and it walks differently. Miss Marple nodded slowly. What about the organist? M.R. Felden? Gerald's brow furrowed. Maybe? It's quiet. I don't remember hearing anything. Miss Marple looked thoughtful. And did you see Peter come back out? No. I ran up before that. Mom was calling me. Thank you, Gerald. You were very most helpful. She straightened and nodded over in Graham, who muttered something non-committal before leading his son away. Vai middag. Inspektör Carvela turnade his attention to Refelden, the organist. Quiet man, a matter to sergeant Torne. Ad, fuzzy. Carrison like a clockmaker wishes to him arrangements. Leave us alone in the cottage behind the chapel. Did you see the way at which Gwenny asked about Peter? Guilt, asked Torne. Or nerves, varied something. They visited the cottage that afternoon. Miss Marple did not accompany them, but she arrived shortly after they left. Emma Felden opened the door as they were at first. His eyes, pale and watery vein, wearing med spectacles, widen Gwen's hair. Miss Marple. I thought they'd bring you this, she said kindly, lifting a basket wrapped in a linen cloth. See cake. You always did enjoy it. I opened the door a little more. That's very kind. She stepped inside. The cottage was tidy, with a strong scent of pepper smoke and lemon oil. The piano sat open in the corner. Sheet music spread across it like fallen leaves. Most of the books on the shelf were in now sanctuary. They sat for a moment, sipping tea. Miss Marple admired the neatness of the room, the meticulous placement of every object. You heard the question Evan again, I said mildly. Felden nodded. Poor child. You think it's innocent. Then Felden blinked. Of course. It's only a boy. Miss Marple tilted her head. And what of Peter Barnes? Felden's face twisted. I don't know what to think. It was a peculiar child. Smart. Always watching. Yes, Miss Marple said gently. Rather like yourself. Felden looked sharply at her. I found a playing card in the vestry curtain, she added casually. A king of hearts. Does that man anything to you? His mouth opened slightly, then closed. And a thing to be in a church, don't you think? I don't play cards, he said quickly. No, Miss Marple said, smiling fondly. But someone does. She let the silence stretch between them before standing. Thank you for the tea, and for the music. You play with such precision. He looked away. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. She paused at the door. We all need order, M.R. Felden. But sometimes we go to great lengths to protect it, even from the truth. She left him there, clutching his teacup like a lifeline. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the church bell she made a quarter hour. The case, Miss Marple thought, was beginning to sieve. The picture was still blurred, but a shape was forming. Someone created a story around Peter Barnes' disappearance, when we saw those, silence, and secret stuck behind curtains. Now, a latter man was to find out who had drawn the fierce line. On Saturday morning, as the village was in a fog of rumors and restless grief, Miss Marple ventured toward the Brancaster estate. It was a large, ivy-clad house on the eastern edge of Stansfield, aloof from the rest of the village in both geography and spirit. The Brancasters had been landed gentry for 3 generations, and took their fortuna guan with time. Their heirs had not. Miss Marple had no interest in their pedigree. She had come, quite deliberately, to speak with the housekeeper, and me. The woman answered the door with flour on her apron and worry on her face. She had the look of someone who had spent the past few nights passing rooms and peering through windows. I don't suppose this is a social visit, she said. Not entirely, said Miss Marple, with a gentle smile that often discerned even the most cautious of souls. May I come in? She was shown into the modest side parlour, where the furniture was well kept but clearly once belonged in grander rooms. A tea service was already laid out, though it looked untouched. It won't keep you long, Miss Marple said. I only hope to ask a few questions about Evan. Emma's Romil's face tightened. He didn't do anything. He's a good boy. He reads. He keeps to himself. He helps in the garden. He's no more capable of harming Peter Barnes than I am. I don't doubt that, Miss Marple said kindly. But sometimes good boys see things they don't understand. Things they tuck away because they don't know how to explain them. Emma's Romil's fingers tightened around her tea cup. There is something you think you should know, she said after a moment, her voice low. Evan came home last week with a torn bit of paper. He didn't think much of it at the time. Es always scribbling things or saving notes. But this one was different. He wouldn't let me throw it away. Do you still have it? She disappeared into the hallway and returned a moment later with a crumpled sheet. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully. It was a church program from the previous Sunday, creased and smoothed with fingerprints. But in the margin, near the bottom, a short phrase was scrawled in the same unsteady pencil as the one found earlier in the belfry. It said the arts can be tricks too. Miss Marple blinked. Another reference to and that word again, arts. Fears the king of arts, and now this. Do you recall when Evan brought this home? The day before Peter went missing, said Migi. They found it near the side door of the church. Thought it was used as scrap. Miss Marple nodded, gently tucking the program into her handbag beside the others. I do appreciate your help, she said. One more question. Have you ever heard Peter mention anyone feared? Not a boy, he said, but someone older. Emerson Romee frowned. No. But on Evan said Peter was afraid of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He asked what that meant, but Evan used Sarah. He thought it was something from a book. Perhaps it was Miss Marple said quietly, or perhaps it was something else. That afternoon, she returned to St. Mildred's alone. The church was empty, save for the advantage of going through the stone arches. She moved slowly through the pews, pausing at the vestry door and walking the length of the side aisle. Her shoes tapped softly against the stone floor. She paused at the votive candle stand and lit one, used one. Its light trembled in the silence. Then she turned and examined the stained glass window near the organ, a scene depicting St. George and the Dragon, with the press and blue-sack caught the sun. But it wasn't the window that caught her eye. It was the small wooden bench beneath it. Going from years of parishioners resting on it, the bench bore a peculiar scuff mark near its base. Used above it, along the skirting board, was a faint smudge. Grease? Perhaps. Or wax. She crowed, adjusted her soul, and ran a hand along the base of the board. There, wedged into the gap between wall and bench, was a slip of woolly glass, dark green velvet, clearly a piece torn from the vestry curtain. She opened it carefully. Inside, a second plain card, the Jack of Hearts. Her breast coat, used slightly. The first card had been the king. Now the Jack. She turned the card over. On the reverse, in tiny, scratchy pencil. The game ends when someone wins. Miss Marple folded the cloth slowly, her fingers deliberate. A pattern was forming. She had seen it before, years ago in a London boarding school, when a quiet girl had accused another of stealing love letters she had never written. The truth had turned out to be a twisted game of attention-seeking, led by a boy who had learned early how to control others without ever appearing cruel. And now, here, in Stansfield, someone was playing a game with arts, with symbols, with a frightened child. And Peter Varnes, clever and sensitive Peter, had realized it all later. Miss Marple rose, brushing invisible dust from her skirt, and crossed to the quiet loft once more. Below her, the pews were shadowed, the church cool wizardly evening. She reached for her handbag, removed the playing cards, and laid them side by side. The king and the jack. There would be a third, she was certain. But whose hand placed them? That question. She now knew had only three possible answers, and one of them was very, very close. The news broke just after events on Sunday, when the weary village had just begun to settle into a rhythm of uneasy silence. It came, as so many village events though, through Geraldton, who burst into the vicarage clashing her umbrella and announced in breathless tones. They were found something in the guelve in the old rectory. Class, they say, dark like a rogue. Cold be Peters. Quitting the hour, Inspector Calvela roped of a crumbling stone well, which sat outfitted beneath brambles on the overrun property of the original rectory, abandoned since the war and left to the ivy. Miss Marple arrived on foot not long after, already sensing that this movement would bring with a crucial change in the shape of the case. The inspector gave her a glance that was a quite parts retassion and weary resignation. "You request in your time," Miss Marple said. "This is a police matter." As most things are when something terrible happens, she said gently. But it's been my experience, Inspector, that terrible things are also often very human things. And that's rather more in my realm. I grunted but made no attempt to send her away. The gwelled in the gildy something, a damp, crumpled robe. It was the quiet robe belonging to Peter Varnes, his initials fondly stitched into the inner collar. There was no blood, no visible damage, but the robe had been knotted at the sleeves and filled with heavy stones. Someone had intended to weigh it down and make it disappear. Miss Marple, standing at the edge of the clearing, talked in the details with quiet solemnity. She watched the constables with their canvasbacks and gloves, heard their clip reports, and saw, most importantly, the absence of grief on any of their faces. They hadn't found Peter, only the idea of him. Ada cui, I don't believe is in there, she said aloud. Calvel turned. No. If someone wanted to hide a body, they wouldn't leave the robe on top, not unless they wanted it to be found. You think someone is trying to mislead us? Miss Marple didn't reply immediately. Instead, she turned to the low stone wall surrounding the clearing and ran her fingers along its edge. It was covered in moss, but beneath the grout, the stone was chipped, deliberately, as if struck by something heavy. She looked up. The robe was placed recently, she said. The fabric is damp but not rotted. The knot is fresh. This was a message. Inspector Calvel raised an eyebrow. And what was it trying to say? Miss Marple tilted her head. That Peter is gone, and it's too late to ask why. That evening, the village was awash in speculation. In the Black Horse, the drinkers spoke in solemn tones. Some sympathetic, others strongly triumphant, as though the revelation of the robe had vindicated their worst suspicions. Evan Romilly, once again, bore the brunt of the suspicion. His silence, his withdrawn manner, and his tenuous connection to Peter Maddyman is his scapegoat. Miss Marple, meanwhile, returned home and laid the cards out again. King, Jack, and now the invisible third. 3 figures, 3 roles. In the games children play, especially the cruel ones, there is always a pecking order, a leader, a follower, and a victim. She thought again of Peter's scribbled words. The arts can be tricks too. It wasn't about playing cards. It was about truth. Peter had trusted someone older, cleverer, perhaps in my ear, and that truth had led him into danger. On Monday morning, Miss Marple visited the church one final time before the police closed of the vestry for evidence handing. Inside, there was sick with the scent of damp stone and melted candle wax. The choir loft remained empty, the organ untouched. She moved to the side lamp post before the candle rack. Her fingers traced the brass edge, then dropped to the ledge used beneath. There, tucked in the candle box, was the tier card, the ace of hearts. Unlike the others, this one bore no note, but Miss Marple did not need one. The ace was always the beginning. The first move, silently for a long moment, then tucked it into her and back beside the others. Peter had known, not the full truth, but an oak to leave being a trial. King, Jack, ace. She thought of the children again, her Allingram, brick but easily led. Evan, intelligent and stranger, and Peter, who had been quiet and watchful. And she thought of the adults whose chapter lives, Emmer Felden, with his lonely cottage and sharp discipline, Emmer Pembroke, with her stern benevolence, Reverend Gross, kin but blind in his truth, and someone else, someone who had not yet shown their full hand. But the game was nearly at an end now. Miss Marple closed her handbag, adjusted her soul, and turned back toward the village, where the final act was waiting to unfold. On Tuesday morning, the village woke to grey skies and a hush that was no key to peace. Word had spread that the police had back closed the case. The quiet robe in the well was being treated as evidence of Peter Varnes' likely death, though nobody had been recovered. Inspector Calvel was preparing to issue a public statement by the end of the week. Some in the village sighed with relief. Miss Marple, however, felt the quiet settling for toes on. She spent much of the morning in her parlour, the curtains drawn used a note to watch the road outside. The kettle steamed beside her as I laid the 3 playing cards, King, Jack, Ace, on her theatre. Her eyes lingered on the ace. The beginning of the game. Only one person in Stansfield consistently traito esteve in the curtain of suspicion. One person who about access to the vestry and a recent orchestrate misdirection. Vad proving it could require more than quiet intuition. It could require one last test. That afternoon, Miss Marple made her way to the vicarage with a sealed envelope tucked in her handbag. The vicar was out visiting a parishioner. Varel se Pembroke was there, sitting by the window with her mending. Dear Miss Marple, I said warmly, standing to greet her. What a week it has been. I dope de villa can be into all. Indeed, Miss Marple replied, settling into a nearby chair. To healing of the Niguayer's truth, don't you think? Emerson Pembroke looked up, her needle paused mid-stitch. Naturally, what is supposed truth can be difficult. Not so difficult, I find, when one listens closely to children. Children? Emerson Pembroke's smile stiffened. They are rarely reliable. They can be, Miss Marple said, retrieving the envelope. I found this in the church. It appears to be written in Peter's hand. Emerson Pembroke did not move, but her shoulders lifted ever so slightly. Miss Marple passed it to her. She didn't open it. Instead, her fingers pressed against the paper, testing the contents, perhaps, or measuring the weight of what it might contain. You're certain it's his? She asked after a long pause. Kite, it was tucked in the candle box. The teardown final card, to, was there, the ace. Peter left a message for someone. I don't see what that proves. It proves, Miss Marple said gently, that someone who Peter was afraid. And that someone chose to silence him, not with violence. Perhaps, but with pressure. Subtle, persuasive pressure. Emerson Pembroke's lips trembled. That's a very serious accusation. No accusation at all, Miss Marple replied. But I do wonder, was it you who encouraged Peter to come early on Wednesdays? To help you to the vestry. The needle dropped into her lap. I never meant him harm, she said quietly. I simply, it was a brick boy, and I knew something about him Mary Felden. Something inappropriate. No, at least, I don't believe so. Vare overheard the conversation. Between Felden and Reverend Rules. Something to do with an old debt. Peter told me about it. Said it was going to tell the inspector. I couldn't let him stir up scandal. Not when the vicar has done so much for these parties. So you frightened him. I told him if stir trouble, no one would believe him. That he might be sent away. Miss Marple said, and that is precisely the sort of cruelty children never forget. Emerson Pembroke closed her eyes. He only meant to protect the church. By protecting the secrets of men who do not deserve it. There was a long silence between them. Finally, Emerson Pembroke whispered, he didn't know a good vanish. He thought a good get over it. But it didn't. And now someone as mad as sure we think won't come back. Miss Marple stood and gently took back the envelope. For what it's worth, I don't believe Peter is dead. Emerson Pembroke blinked. You don't. No, Miss Marple said. Because the robe in the well was planted. And because Peter left his clues deliberately. A chill was being frightened into silence though until messages unless is trying to be found. She offered a brief smile. Perhaps it estimated you help that happen. That evening, Miss Marple visited Romilly's one last time. Evan was in the garden, tending the petunias as though nothing in the world a chant. But when I saw Miss Marple, a Rosa and walked over, eyes steady. It's not dead, is it? I asked. I don't believe so. Evan nodded. I didn't think so either. Peter's clever. I said he had a plan. A plan. To get away. To scare someone. To make them think it disappeared. But then, Evan looked down. Stop talking about it. I think he got scared again. Miss Marple knelt beside him. Do you know where me go? Evan hesitated. There is a place. In the goods, past the Miss Pass. An old stone hut. We can get it the king's house. Because it was secret. She placed a hand gently on his. Would you show me? And nodded. And so, with us falling on the village anywhere, Miss Marple followed the van into the goods, toward the place where games were played, secrets hidden, and perhaps a frightened boy was waiting for one adult who would truly listen. The ghouls beyond the Stansfield were land tunnel, more forgotten than feared. Children alone span tales of secret kingdoms among its trees. Stories pass like whispers, are believed and are dismissed. Evan led the way with a surprising calmness for a boy so young. Miss Marple followed, her walking stick steady against the forest floor, her soul drawn close against the gathering chill. The sun asleep low, casting long shadows between the trees. They walked in silence until the well-worn path narrowed and veered sharply down a gully. At its base, all hidden beneath the road, sat a moss-covered stone structure, guarded on the venaga Mekeper's lodge, now nothing more than a ruin. There, Evan said softly, pointing. Miss Marple's breast missed before the hair. She stepped forward carefully, her eyes scanning every branch on the stone. Peter? Say Cayet, her voice gentle but firm. Peter Varnes, it's Miss Marple. Silence, then a rustle, barely more than a breath, and a fan shifting from behind the low doorway. Miss Marple moved no closer. She waited, and then, from the gloom, a small figure emerged. Dirty smooth-head, ojo-eyed, varan mistakably Peter Varnes. He looked at her with a mix of defiance and fear, like a beard unsure whether it would fly or freeze. You phone me, he said. Miss Marple gave a soft smile. Not Evan. Peter looked at his friend, who had back near the tree line. He didn't tell, Evan said. He promised, but Miss Marple, say guessed. Peter's lip trembled. He wasn't going to stay forever, he said quickly. He wanted them to stop. He wanted to scare them. Miss Marple pressed slowly and sat on the worn stone step. Start from the beginning, dear. Slowly. Peter sank beside her, knees pulled to his chest. It started weeks ago. Someone left a card in my hymnal. A king of hearts. He thought it was a joke. But there was another, being the curtain in the vestry. The jack. His voice trembled. And then, notice, telling me not to talk. To keep quiet about what it is seen. What had you seen? Peter hesitated. M.R. Felden. Anlemers Pembroke. In the vestry. Latte. I think they were arguing about money. I didn't mean to listen, but I couldn't move. I was scared they decime. I told Gerald, and said he saw someone. But then the cards started appearing. I got scared. Thought maybe someone else knew. Miss Marple nodded slowly. So you ran. Peter shook his head. He didn't mean to vanish. He just wanted to make them worry. Make them think it was serious. But when the robber went missing, he knew it had gone too far. The robber wasn't your doing. No. I think someone else took it. Maybe they told it at all. Miss Marple felt the cold tighten in her chest. Someone trying to see the story, or distract the police. Peter glanced down. He didn't mean for Evan to get blamed. And yet, Miss Marple said gently, you knew a ghoul. Peter looked ashamed. He left the cards, admitted. He thought someone would understand, but he didn't know who to trust. You trusted the wrong people, perhaps, but that can be mended. She stood and extended a hand. Come now. It's time to come home. They returned under cover of dusk. Miss Marple sent Evan ahead to learn Inspector Calder. Those scared to say nothing of the cards or the stone lodge. The truth. Sainu, good need to come in liars. By the timid area of the Rumi house, a small group had gathered, weeping, cattle fuming, and the village already staring whisperous gossip. Peter stood silently beside Miss Marple as Calvin demanded to know where had been, what had happened, why had run. The boy answered simply. He was scared. He didn't trust anyone. Miss Marple said nothing. Not yet. Because the trap had not been sprung. The real game, Peter's game, was not over. The final piece would fall into place on. And when it did, she would be waiting. Not with accusation, but with understanding, and, as ever, the quiet, lethal truth. By Wednesday morning, the village was buzzing with a new energy. Half relief, half suspicion. Peter Varnes was home, alive, if pale and exhausted, and now being watched over by Romia's told were a porcelain saying. Inspector Calvel issued a restrained statement declaring the boy in good air. Though the inspectors mulakullet once more into resentment at having been outmaneuvered. Miss Marple, for her part, kept herself busy that day not with knitting, but with there. That is to say, she hosted a quiet affair. No invitations, no formalities, use a few cups, a freshly baked cake, and a murmured word here and there at the grocer's or the post office. Before long, as I predicted, the key players found their way to her sitting room at intervals. Gerald Ingram, pale twitching at the sleeve, Emil Pembroke, stern and tripped, and, most Leslie, Emil Felden. A camelas, his hat in hand and his fingers fretting along the rim. He heard the voice returned, said, a tempting cheer. Miss Marple offered him a cup. In the, is recovering naively, a quiet chill, but sharp, noticeably frightened. M.R. Felden glanced toward the window. Well, it's good news. And there is little more to be said. Oh, on the contrary, said Miss Marple mildly, there is everything to be said, especially now that Peter's no longer missing. She placed a small slip of paper on the table between them. It was the ace of hearts. M.R. Felden did not touch it, but she saw the corner of his mouth flicker. Used once. A curious choice, she went on. You see, the king of hearts come first, then the jack, then the ace. Most good assume their soul be reversed. But Peter, I think, was trying to tell a story. She smiled at him as though discussing a nursery rhyme. A game, you see, a game with three players. The king, older, commanding. The jack, slippery, easily led. And the ace, the true beginning. The boy who sees everything and says nothing, until it's too late. Felden's nucleus beaten it around his cup. I there side you were given it far more to than a chill sprang deserves, said, voice brittle. Oh, I quite agree. It would be foolish to dwell on children's games. Unless, of course, those games mirror something quite real. She leaned forward, her voice barely more than a murmur. Peter didn't vanish because was rebellious. Vanished because someone tried to frighten him into silence. And when that didn't work, when he left clues instead, someone else tried to make it seem final. The robbery in the well, the misdirection. Felden stood abruptly. He must be going. Imagine you must, Miss Marple said gently. But consider, M.R. Felden, consider who else may be playing your game. Because I assure you, Peter is not the only one who knows the truth. After he left, Miss Marple penned a short note and sent it via a neighbor's boy to Inspector Caldwell. It said only this: please gather at relevant parties in the vestry at St. tomorrow evening. I relieve the final truth will be best served in the place where it began. And so, that Thursday evening, as the sun dipped behind the bell tower and the last lights scattered stained glass across the church floor, the villagers filed into the vestry. Emil Pembroke, rigid as carved stone. Gerald Ingram, bringing his cap. Emil Felden, expressionist and stiff. The Reverend Groves, looking like a man who had misplaced something terribly important. Peter Varney stood at the back, Hannah Evans, quiet but steady. And Miss Marple, as always, was the last to arrive. She took her place before the group, set her hand back down, and folded her hands over it. My friend, she said, the team has come to speak plainly. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Outside, the fierce notes of evening rain tapped against the stained glass like a slow, steady heartbeat. And inside, the final game was about to begin. The vestry was lit with a single hanging lamp, which cast long shadows across the paneled walls and polished floor. It smelled of olive nails and the stone dampness, with the faint scent of incense still clinging to the air. Everyone assembled looked at Miss Marple, but she wasn't looking at them, at least not directly. Her gaze moved between them like a finger through fog, tracing lines they couldn't yet see. You may forgive the setting, she said, placing her hand on the worn altar table. But it felt appropriate. We so rarely confront truths in the place where lies are usually spoken most carefully. M.R.S. Pembroke bristled at the remark. Gerald Ingram looked confused. M.R. Felden demanded still, eyes unreadable. The boy is safe, Inspector Caldwell said from the back, where stood with arms crossed. If you know something more, Miss Marple, say it plainly. She inclined her head. Very well, Inspector. Let's begin at the beginning. Not with Peter's disappearance, but with a different event. A conversation in this very vestry, one overheard by Peter Varnes, which involved Felden and Pembroke. MRS Pembroke Stratton, her voice easy. I explain to you, Miss Marple, that conversation was entirely innocent, about Paris finances and nothing more. Indeed, said Miss Marple, but not everyone in the room was convinced of its innocence. Peter was hiding behind the curtain that day, perhaps even before either of you arrived, and the heard the note to believe someone was in trouble, or being threatened. Miss Marple turned slightly. You see, Peter is not a boy who lives to conclusions, but is a boy who sees connections. And notice, for instance, that you, MRS Pembroke, seem not afraid of MR Felden, and that you, MR Felden, began watching Peter far too closely for a man who had no concern in the matter. MR Felden's expression tightened. Miss Marple continued, calmly, and then the cards began to appear, first in Peter's hymnal, then in the vestry, and finally hidden behind the candle box. A game, yes, but a calculated one designed to frighten him, to make him believe he was being watched, manipulated, hunted. She opened her and began the three playing cards on the altar table, the king, the jack, and the ace of hearts. A trinity of power, obedience, and vulnerability. Peter was the ace. The jack, I believe, was herald. Alice turned toward the boy, who sat on beneath the stairs. I didn't do anything, he cried. I didn't know what the cards meant. No, said Miss Marple, gently, but someone did. Someone gave them to you and asked you to pass them along. As a joke, they said. As part of a game. Herald's mouth opened. "'Cause, he told me to, he whispered, M.R. Felden. He said it would help get Peter out of trouble. That it was getting too nosy." Caldwell stepped forward, frowning. "Felden, is this true?" M.R. Felden's voice, when it came, was cold and quiet. "Children are foolish. It was trying to scare him a little, yes, but nothing more. It got out of hand. You planted the rubber in the well. It didn't harm the boy," Felden snapped, "and it didn't lie to you. It thought if people believed they run off for good, it would all fade away. These things, they spiraled." Miss Marple's voice, ever mild, could throw his words like a thread rolling in. "And what were you trying to make fade away, M.R. Felden? The debt you owe the church funds? Or the growing awareness that someone, perhaps Peter, meet and cover it?" Silence. Tenacity, resigned, bitter. "I've served this parish for 20 years, he said. You think he intended to hurt him? He only wanted to protect what little dignity he had left, by frightening a child into silence." Miss Marple shook her head. "I came to you for guidance, and you turned it into a test of power." Reverend Grove stepped forward at last, his face pale. "Is this true, Felden? You told me the accounts were balanced." Felden didn't answer. The silence was an oak. It was Caldwell who placed a hand on Felden's shoulder and led him away. No handcuffs yet, no formal arrest, but no gravity in his footsteps to suggest things would not be hushed this time. Herald slumped against the wall, eyes wide. M.S. Pembroke said nothing, but her face had turned a terrible shadow of grey. Miss Marple turned to Peter. "You were brave," she said, "and clever. But you must never believe again that you have to run to be safe. The truth you intended to hide." Peter looked down, and then, at last, gave a small nod. Tomorrow would bring questions, gossip, consequences. But tonight, at last, the vestry was quiet. The village of Stansfield has seen many disturbances in its long history. Floods, fires, the war years, but fewer than settled it like the disappearance of Peter Varnes. And fewer still had left such a complex issue in its parlor rooms, church pews, and corner queues. For a week after the vestry confrontation, the talk in Stansfield was unending. Though, as Miss Marple would note with her characteristic delicacy, not always productive, M.R. Felden had formally resigned his post. The diocesan committee would no doubt take weeks to issue a full accounting of his conduct, but his quiet departure and the sudden balancing of the church books per volumes toto se jugadais to see. M.S. Pembroke, once a bulwark of respectability, found herself keeping to the shadows more than the spotlight. She did not resign from her various villa committees, but her voice lost its usual certainty at meetings, and she no longer looked Miss Marple directly in the eye. As for her Allingram, he resumed his schooling with a grave solemnity not common to boys his age. He avoided Peter for a time, more from guilt than rejection, and it was not until the following spring, at the Easter recital, that to share a glance of mutual, if querulous, understanding. Peter himself stayed quiet, not silent, never again that, but watchful. The cards he had once hidden were never mentioned, nor were the names he feared to speak. He returned to the quiet love without plan. And though he kept his voice low in the hymns, stood tall when singing them. One mile Fraida, with the daffodils beginning to pierce the lawn and the first pot of orange pekoe steeping in the parlour, Miss Marple sat opposite Reverend Groves, who had requested her company with a note that read only, for a matter of culture. Esther hissed slowly. I sought for vain rimly spectacles. I suppose, he said at last, if all Peter in was I'm still beginning to understand. Miss Marple smiled softly. I suspect Guialdo, in small was. Children notice what we think they miss, and they feel more deeply than they show. Groves nodded. You believe him before anyone else did. I listened to him, Reverend. That is not the same thing, but often much more important. He looked up, brows drawn. What was it that told you Emery Felden was involved? That it wasn't they used a runaway boy and an overactive imagination. Miss Marple sipped her tea. There were too many performances. People pretending not to be afraid, when they were. MRS. Pembroke's insistence on silence. M.R. Felden's sudden concern. Even Peter's clues, left like breadcrumbs, but not leading to a body. No one truly grieving, and yet everyone talking of the ad. It was too theatrical. She tapped her teaspoon against her sauce. Also, Avalon observed that when someone wishes to frighten another person, they rarely do so directly. Cards, symbols, whispers, they speak in shadows. Emery Felden was a man who had grown accustomed to authority but had lost the moral right to wield it. She paused, and Peter, bless him, recognized that. Groves leaned back, exhaling slowly. It's strange. We always assume we protect children. We forget how often they are the ones protecting us from the truths we refuse to see. Miss Marple chuckled quietly. You sound more like a philosopher than a clergyman today. A Gavarai smiled. Perhaps a both intime. Outside, children's voices floating from the lane. Peter and the van passed the window, walking with books under their arms and the comfortable little boys who had once been frightened, but were no longer afraid. Miss Marple's gas followed them until they vanished beyond the hedge. I often think, said Sophie, that even in the villa don't take in those, but in habits, in what we were willing to excuse, and who we were willing to protect. Groves nodded. And it's people like you who kept the rest of us honest. Oh, I open not, I said, chuckling again. I rather dislike honesty. Truth, however, that is something else entirely. She lifted her tea cup and took a final sip, satisfied. The lark sang over Stansfield once more. The Paris bells rang out the hour, and told the secrets of the vestry would not be forgotten. Life, quiet, sharp, and infinitely human, resumed with all the steadiness of spring. And Miss Marple, as ever, returned to her knitting.